Wales is the earliest nation in Europe to have recorded, codified laws. So the laws of Hywel Dda in Wales is the earliest written system of codified laws. And what's particularly interesting about the laws of Hywel Dda, and what speaks to that difference in culture between the Anglosphere and a nation like Wales, is that if you look at the laws of Hywel Dda, they are incredibly equal and egalitarian. They give pretty much equal status to women as men, with very little. So a woman can happily divorce a man for domestic abuse, for example. A woman could just divorce a man, which is, this is 1,000 years ago and more. On the other hand, a man is allowed to divorce his wife if she disparages his beard, which is one of my favorite laws in there. But it's very equal. And even when it comes to provision for the separation of wealth between partners, that egalitarian, equal sort of sense that there is no difference between men and women, or indeed, particularly between a Gwern bobl, the folk people, the regular people, and their leaders. And I think that's still there in much of Wales. I mean, there's been an attempt to impose the rigid class system of the Anglosphere in Wales, but really, there's only two classes in Wales. There's the crachach and the Gwern, and that's it. Which is, effectively, I suppose, the aristocracy and the regular people, or the establishment and the regular people. So Hywel Dda, I think, is something we should be much prouder of, and something we should make much more of, and a defining difference that we should highlight. I'm going to talk about Henry Richard MP. He was a Liberal MP for Merthyr Tydfil back in the second half of the 19th century, because he's a hugely important and significant figure, particularly in campaigning for peace. Global peace, even back in the 19th century. And also there's a massive statue of him on the square in Tregaron, and he's from Tregaron. And every morning when I would get up and look out of the window, I would see his head, because that's where his head was. On the first floor, when you looked out the window, you'd see Henry Richard standing there with his book, and he's big. But Henry Richard is important because he was the secretary of the Peace Society for almost 40 years. And during that time, he crisscrossed Europe, campaigning for peace and creating networks of like-minded people. He, in his lifetime, was called the Apostle for Peace. And there is a very decent argument to be made that it's his work that laid the foundations for what became the League of Nations and then subsequently the United Nations. And because the 19th century was such a small place, with individual figures being so important and significant, you could make a very cogent argument for Henry Richard being the father of the United Nations. And yet we do none of that. And he's a forgotten guy from Tregaron, which is mad, absolutely mad, and he's not the only one. Robert Recorde invented the equals sign. How many kids get to hear that in maths when they're in primary school? There's a Welsh guy from North Wales. And then you've got people like Dr. Richard Price, who was massively important and influential in the founding of the United States of America. We don't really do enough. We don't talk about it enough. Here in Wales. And I'm going to give you a little fact. Wales is almost exactly the same size geographically as Slovenia.
Oh, how does the population compare? Is it a comparative country in that sense?
Very, very comparative. With the difference that Slovenia became independent in 1991 and was poorer than Wales at that time, and is now significantly wealthier than Wales and on an upward trajectory. Across Europe, Slovenia is actually the most equal society in Europe economically in terms of wealth disparity, and also scores incredibly highly on well-being measurements as well.
I have to go on holiday to Slovenia.
No, you should definitely go on holiday to Slovenia. It's meant to be great. My brother's been there and he keeps telling me I should go, and I'd love to go. Another interesting thing about that is, it's been 34 years since they became independent. In that time, they've had centre-left governments, they've had centre-right governments, they've had the usual political scandals, corruption, all of those different things. And yet, despite all of that, despite all of those regular political shenanigans, they have still managed to flourish as a nation and to, improve the quality of life of the people of Slovenia, the general wealth and well-being of the nation. And part of that, I think, is just because within Slovenia, there's a shared vision of what Slovenia wants to become when it grows up. Something Wales does not have.